I haven't told my story in a long time, and whenever I do, I get kind of emotional about it because it's a very special time in my life. Um, since I'm a little nearsighted, I have to hold this up a little bit, so I hope you don't be offended. Unless I can raise this up, but this looks like this is pretty stationary.
Bring it up. Yeah, you can bring it up on the stage.
Just pick up the whole thing. There.
Okay, that's pretty good. That's better. Thank you. This is a story of the power of love, God's love in my life.
Amen.
And going back to the first part of my adult years, I worked for Rockwell International as a field engineer for 18 years. And it was a major aerospace company. I found myself transferred up to Sacramento to work at McClellan Air Force Base. And shortly after I arrived, I was told by the officer who I was supposed to work under that the billet, or the position that he had put in for me, had been refused. So here I was up there. He said, but don't worry, I'll find something for you to do. So for about 2.5 years, I was totally bored, out of my mind. In fact, they didn't even care about when I came in or when I left. So I just felt I was still pretty young. I felt I had a lot to offer, and I thought my whole work experience was going to be with that company. Well, one day we started going to a church down in Fair Oaks called Sunrise Baptist Church, and at that point I met a man who I befriended, and I thought, this is a sharp-looking guy. He's always had a suit and tie on, and one day we went to a church event at a roller skating rink. And we're skating around, and I'm sharing with him, about how bored I was and all this. He said, well, have you ever thought about becoming a real estate agent? I said, I'm a technical person. I've never sold anything in my life. But he said, he encouraged me to do it, so I got my license, and the first day, I started talking to people even before I got my license. And the very first day that I got my license, I listed a home, which is pretty incredible. But so I think it was the Lord verifying to me that I was doing the right thing. So I really took to real estate and the sales, and I found out it really isn't much in the term of salesperson. That your title is salesperson. But I found out that what you really are is more like a facilitator. You have to be a good listener. You have to really know and try to understand and paint a mental picture in your mind of what they're trying to tell you as far as what. And many times people would say to me, I've worked with other agents, and they just don't, they've showed us houses that we're totally not interested in. And that's because they weren't listening. So I became very successful. In the first year of my career, I was Rookie of the Year. And then I went to an awards dinner, and I saw this woman getting an award for being the top producer in the company. And I told my wife, I says, next year that's going to be me. So I set out to be the top producer in the company, which was about 250 agents. 7 offices, and it was only my second full year in real estate. I worked 14 to 16 hours. Now, at the same time, I was very much involved with the music ministry in the church. I was in the choir, and gradually, real estate became my God, and I started drifting away from my ministries at church. One day, I was out showing property, and I did achieve my goal. It cost me, as you'll see later, my health. and how God brought me up short and said, "Oh, I'm going to get your attention one way or the other." So I was out showing property, and I was getting back into my car with a client, and I felt this sharp pain in my leg, and I thought I had pulled a muscle or something. And I went and had it looked at, and they said, you probably just pulled a muscle. And, go home, take 2 aspirins, and call me in the morning, type thing. But the pain got worse, and really just did not want to go away. And I knew well enough, I had pulled muscles before, and this just didn't feel like a pulled muscle. So I went back to Kaiser, and who was my carrier at the time, and I insisted that I get some blood tests. So they reluctantly agreed to give me a blood test, and when the next day I was still in horrible pain, I got a call. And basically what they said was, there's something funny about that in your blood. I'm not quite sure what it is, but there's something going on. You better come in and have a doctor look at it. So when the doctor looked at the slide, he had a suspicion of what it was. And I went in, and the only way to positively diagnose what he thought I had was to do a bone marrow test. If anybody ever had a bone marrow test, it is extremely painful, and there isn't really much they can do to minimize the pain. The diagnosis came back positive, what the doctor had suspected. At that point in time, they didn't really have a lot of therapies, a lot of things going for what I had. It was called hairy cell leukemia, a very rare form of leukemia. About 5% of all leukemias have this. The prognosis, basically, you could go into a chronic state or you could go into an acute state, and fortunately for me, I was in the chronic state. The treatment of choice at that time was to remove my spleen, and in the hospital they had a splenectomy, and I gave birth to an 8.5-pound spleen. So after that, basically, it was I went to Mexico for some treatments. I was there for two and a half weeks. Went back to my church and started singing again in the choir. Felt well enough. There were some other people in the church that happened to have, this one gentleman that was in the choir with me had lymphoma. He ended up not being as fortunate as I, passed away. There was another lady that had a very rare type of ovarian cancer. I remember one time she and I sung a duet, and we were both in tears because we were still upright and standing, and the Lord had. So for some time, a period of about 2 years, I went through various therapies. I had to have, periodically, I had to get blood transfusions. My immune system was very highly compromised, and I had to get special treatments. I may skip over some of this stuff, but I ended up with a spot on my lung, and they tried to do a biopsy at Kaiser, and it was a miserable failure. But the only way that they could really positively diagnose that was with something called a bronchoscopy, which is they put something down your throat. Basically, they have to stop you breathing because your lungs have to be perfectly still. And that was no fun when they tell you you can't breathe and you're awake.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. So I went through that. Then there was a period of time, and this is what I'm kind of leading up to, is how God really got my attention. I was at the American River Hospital, and I had been there for some time. My blood counts got so low, my white blood cells had gotten so low. What leukemia does, basically, the cancer cells reproduce so fast, and the function of your bone marrow, the inside of your bone marrow, actually produces most of your blood cells in your body. You know that. So what this does, basically, it packs your bone marrow with a bunch of cells, cancer cells, that don't do anything except take up space, and crowds out the good cells. So you can't make any good white cells, you can't make any good platelets or red blood cells. So my blood counts were very, very low. And at one point, I was in isolation. My wife was in the same room next to me. She slept with me. And I'll tell you, I would not be standing here today if it wasn't for my wife. Fighting for me, encouraging me, being at my side throughout this whole 2.5-year ordeal that I went through. And she was in the room, and somehow I had this feeling that if I was going to die, it would be at night. So if I could see the daylight, if I could see the dawn breaking in the window, I knew I could live another day. God would give me another day as long as I could see the daylight. So I was very afraid of going to sleep at night because I didn't think I was ever going to wake up. So I was in the bed one night, and my blood counts had gotten down dangerously low. My white blood count was down around 300. In fact, the machines that they had at the time could not read my white blood count, so they had to do it by hand. They had to read my white blood count was down around 300. Normal is about between 4,000 and 7,000. So I laid there in bed. It was pre-dawn, and then I awoke, and there was a window in the hospital room, and I could start to see the light coming through the window. And I was there. My wife was kind of asleep, and I was sort of, and I felt this presence in the room. I can't tell you whether it was an angel, whether it was the Lord, but I knew there was some supernatural thing going on in my room. And I felt a peace, such a peace in my heart that I've never felt that before. And this presence gave me a peace and said, "You're going to be okay." That's all I felt was that voice was saying to me, "It's going to be okay. You're going to be all right." And after I felt that, I went over to I leaned over the bed, or turned over in the bed, and said to my wife, "Did you feel that?" And she said, "Yes, I did." That morning, at Sunrise Baptist Church, they had a special meeting before Sunday. It was a Sunday morning, and they had a special meeting. The pastors and the staff met before the worship service to pray, and my name was mentioned in the prayer. And at 7:30 in the morning, the nurse came in and did my usual blood check. I was getting my blood tested 3 times a day. So she came in and did my blood test, and it went from 300 to about 500. That's the first time, without any intervention, that my blood, in 2.5 years, that my blood counts ever had gone up without any intervention. My pastor, Pastor Clarence Walth, who came in to visit me that Sunday morning, and I told him what I had experienced, and he said, "About what time was that?" I said, "It was around 7:30, 8 o'clock." He says, "That's when we were praying for you that morning." So the next blood test, my white blood count was up to 800. And it kept on going up to the point where it got to about 2,000. They felt well enough for me to be able to go home. So I was at American River Hospital for about 2 weeks total. But that spot in my lung was still there, and we finally got the diagnosis from the bronchoscopy. I had something called aspergillosis, which is a fungus infection. The only treatment at that time for it was to take this medicine called amphotericin, and it was nicknamed amphoterrible. Basically, it's a poison. Once you have an infection of a fungus in your lung, unless they were able to actually take that section of your lung out, the only way to attack it is to poison its food supply, which was me. Okay? That's kind of graphic, but that's what it is. You have to poison. And in going through those treatments, it was horrible. It was a horrible, horrible period. I won't go into a lot of detail, but it was very bad. And I went home, and I still got this. I was having this fever, and my wife was able to secure. When I left Rockwell, I was able to get insurance, but only because my wife applied for it, and she fought vehemently to get me health coverage. So, long story short, I was referred to a Dr. Jerry Lewis over at the University of California at
University of Chicago.
No, Sacramento, UC Sacramento.
Okay.
And he was an oncologist, and I told him that I had had regular insurance. He said, "You're a very lucky man." He knew what I was facing at Kaiser. So I was able to get regular health insurance, and Dr. Lewis referred me to a specialist in hairy cell leukemia. His name was Dr. Harvey Gollum, and Dr. Gollum was at the University of Chicago Medical Center. So when I got on the plane to go see Dr. Gollum, my fever was running around 100 to 101. I got on the plane with a fever. When I landed in Chicago, my fever broke. I had no fever. I went to saw Dr. Gollum. He must have drawn about 2 quarts of blood to check it out. And Dr. Gollum said, "I think I can handle your hairy cell," because he was a specialist. He was a world-renowned specialist in this disease, and it kind of happened by accident. A couple of other doctors have referred him to this, and then he started learning more and more about it, and became a specialist in hairy cell leukemia, one of the few people. And he said, "I think I can handle your hairy cell leukemia, but I'm worried about that spot on your lung." He says, "How do you feel?" I says, "Oh, I feel okay, you know." He says, "You don't have a fever?" "No, I don't." I says, when I left Southern California, I did have one. So he said to me, he says, "If you had had a fever, I would have put you in the operating room immediately to get that spot out of your lung. I don't care what it is, we got to get rid of it." I may have these things a little bit out of order, because I'm not referring to my notes. But he put me on what at that time was the state of the art. It was a drug that he had helped develop was called Leukeran. And I started on the Leukeran treatments and nothing else, because he did not want anything to interfere with the results. I went back to Southern California after seeing Dr. Golomb, and as soon as I landed in Southern California, my fever came back. That was a miracle. I can't explain how that happened. During the time I was in Chicago, no fever. Came back to Southern California, fever broke out again. So I started to regress a little bit, and I had another doctor who was a doctor here locally, who was an oncologist, and he was a wonderful doctor. And he followed Dr. Golomb's instructions. One of the things I learned about cancer was there's things what's called that are called local cancer boards. The local cancer boards determine what the standard of treatment is for every possible disease. And if it's an oncology issue, it's a cancer. And I don't know how many different kinds of cancer there are. There's leukemias, there's regular, what they call cancers that have substance to them that are in the other parts of your body. And the doctors cannot vary from that treatment of choice, from that board-certified treatment of choice. If they vary from it on their own, they could face lawsuits, and their malpractice insurance won't cover them if they vary from this, unless a research hospital, which was University of Chicago Medical Center, was a research hospital. They were able to basically supervise my treatment, which was not the same as the local cancer board. So the local doctor here followed the instructions, and he was really concerned because he'd never been involved with treatment like Dr. Golomb had suggested. And I started to regress a little bit, and then my blood counts came up. Within about 4.5 months, my blood counts were normal. All my blood counts were normal. My platelets, my red blood cells, my white blood cell count, everything within about 4.5 months. But it took a lot of guts on the part of the doctor here locally, because he wanted to take me off the Leukeran and start putting me back on the stuff that was just kind of like holding me but not really helping me. So the Leukeran at that time was very effective. They have treatments now for hairy cell leukemia, which basically, if it's caught early enough, they have about a 97% cure rate. That's a cure rate, not just. In fact, Dr. Golomb was talking about research that they have at University of Chicago that was ongoing at the time. They were talking about the silver bullet. Remember the Lone Ranger and the silver bullet? Okay. The silver bullet, basically what that does is it's a very specialized treatment that goes after that specific type of cancer cell. And so they developed that, you know, and it's these are very good friends of mine that just came in the room. In fact, these friends of mine were part of the story, kind of. They knew what was going on with me at the time, and thank you so much for coming. So the story is basically I was serving the Lord in a capacity in music and singing and becoming very much involved. My wife and I were officers in the denomination, and we were very influential in the church. And this real estate thing just pulled me away from God. And I was working 14, 16 hours a day. And God pulled me up short. He got my attention. And so the bottom line is that, and a lot of times I've spoken to groups of men. This especially is true with men. Sometimes their careers become their God, and money, and awards and accolades and medals and trophies become their God, and that's what happened to me. And God pulled me up short, but I'm standing here, a 31-year cancer survivor. 31 years, and during that time, you know, when I was 43 years old when this happened, and I hadn't even seen any of my grandchildren yet. And I remember crying to the Lord when I first got diagnosed. You know, I haven't seen my girls get married. I haven't seen any of my grandchildren. Lord, I prayed. You know, I really prayed. There was this man that, he's passed away now, said to me, you know, a lot of people in the church are praying for you. He says, but you got to pray for yourself. You really have to ask the Lord to be merciful. And he was. So, for those men or people that think their careers are more important than God, and I couldn't be more of a witness to the fact that God should be and always should be the most important thing in your life. So that's my story.
Mhm.